We're streaming, okay.
Everything the same but the route, I think.
Okay, that's perfect. Alright, we're on. It's great.
Riverside, California.
We're great. Uh-oh, there's some growling. It's dog's a generator, I'm telling you. No, it's not. Okay, so... hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm going to send a couple of messages to folks to let them know that we are on. We're just going to be getting ready. The topic tonight is Into the Red, the design side. And I'm just going to... All right.
To the red.
All right.
I was just looking where he can get it from.
So you need 40 of the channels. And then 61.
Well,
Oh, I mean, there's other ones too.
Okay.
Most of
Let's see.
the channels that are unconscious. I have a whole channel that's unconscious.
We had 7 centers defined today by transit at one point.
Oh,
because
we
of the
did?
moon. Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Wow.
Just on the personality side.
Yep.
That's a lot of personality
Yeah.
activation today.
Everything but heart and solar plexus was defined.
Wow.
But I think the moon has moved on. The moon was maybe filling in the G or something. Or no, Venus was filling in the G. Venus was in 10. The moon was... Oh, the moon was in the spleen. So you were fully defined today. Got
Oh,
a taste of that. How'd that feel?
interesting. Felt a little more carefree than usual.
Let's see, who else should we... I just want a message. Well, anyway.
Johnny?
Oh, yeah, that's right. He's a 2-5. It's very hard to get them to do things. They have to psych themselves into it. Tell them, you should tune in. I always start the you should for a second, like, you should tune into YouTube stream right now. We are on and would love to chat. Okay.
Do you want the rest of my
Great.
stuff?
What's
Do you
up?
want the rest of my stuff?
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah, we absolutely need it. So, birth time.
9:13 p.m.
So that's going to be a
21:13.
21:13. Yeah, I know this game. And then a birthplace.
Riverside, California.
And that's also the USA
Yep.
hyphen California. I know this game as well. No, this app is so ancient. It like makes you enter. What it actually ends up in is with this Riverside, Riverside,
Yeah.
California. That's the
Yeah, because there's also some of them show a Riverside Junction, and that's like a totally different spot.
yeah. Oh, they're probably in the same time zone. So. Yeah. Well, I'm excited today for the topic of. And this is Jinx.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know his birthday, but we do not know his birth time. So.
Oh, well, it'd be fun to do a little,
Wait, what is that?
Wait, if you know his birthday,
Wait, what
let's
is
do
this?
it. This is Amber's chart.
No?
So-
Is that it?
Oh,
that's
no,
right.
that's not
I
it.
don't
It
have
must
it
have been backwards. It was 11/8. It must be 8/11. Wait, not even 11/8. Oh, that's today's date. You know what? It does this sometimes, where it'll lose the date.
Yeah.
March 13th.
That's
yeah.
happened to me before. And it
3/13/80.
was confusing.
Okay.
I was
I was
like,
looking at
Yeah, that's
where's
definitely
the
not. Yeah, that's happened before. Perfect.
That looks better.
Bobo, hello. First time catching a live.
Yeah.
1648 defined on my design side. My personality Pluto is also in 48.3, so it's a twice defined gate. Oh, very cool. Personality Pluto. Yeah, that gate 48, gate of depth. Well, the 1648, we can just jump right in. It's just off the bat. What that's going to show, that's the channel of talent. It's all about skill. And what it's going to show is that it's going to be very easy for you to see how important the depth is. How important really having the depth of solutions.
And
how
the meaning?
Important, how important? Well, I think of 48 as fundamentally about like a toolbox of just endless experience, or not even experience, but more like pattern, what you've learned from the repetition of the pattern. It's the drip, drip, drip. You learn one little thing at a time, And that 48, that well, fills up and has just this depth of solutions that are practical solutions for problems. This is logic. This is what it's all about. Now, on the other side of it, you have...
It does seem to, like, create meaning, not create meaning, but find meaning by connecting those dots of knowledge they have.
Yeah, oftentimes...
it trims the fat by getting rid of stuff that isn't essential to
Yeah, and oftentimes things that...
that's what the 60
like it also depends what you mean by meaning, but oftentimes when somebody says their life feels meaningless, what they're talking about is like an individual thing, like the Gate 28. That's where we have a lot of lines about meaning.
I guess I mean more so meaning, like, behind ideas or projects or creativity, like the meaning behind the painting or the, that's...
I see what you're saying, because that's how I think of that channel, is like finding the integral thing. What makes this count as this kind of painting? What makes this count as this kind of product or whatever?
It's the ultimate outcome of the 1858. So the 1858 ultimately says this should be made much better, and then the 48 goes, I know how to improve it. The best way to improve a photo is you take it and you just turn up the brightness and turn down this, and it learns. If it's left variable, it's going to be very pattern based. If it's right variable, it's a little weird because it's such an ancient, historic thing in the past. But again, the variable placements don't really matter because that has more to do with how you operate in flow state or not, and how you operate through kind of trying or not, and it's like a very different kind of thing when you get into variable. At a fundamental level, anyone with the 4816 is going to really need to create. It's the logical creativity. And as we talked about in our creativity channels kind of discussion, where we were looking at the channels quite some time ago, we found that people who don't have, basically if they're not a manifestor or a manifesting generator, if they're a projector and they have the 4816, then it's really important to collaborate. Very, very important to collaborate with other people who oftentimes will have the 1858, or at the very least will have the energy to help power that creativity. Because otherwise, it's like you have all of the knowledge of what to do and all of the creative spirit and all of the ability, but without the other person there, you're kind of stuck. So what Ra nicknames it is no solo projects. If you're a 4816 projector, this is no solo projects. Now, because we're talking about the design side, the 16, for anyone who has 16 on the design side, they're not going to realize it's going to be this blind spot. Not that it really causes a problem. There's no real problem here, but there's going to be a blind spot around not realizing how good they are at the design side of it and how much they're doing the design side of it too. And they're going to think that talent is all about depth. They're going to think talent is 100% about the 48. The personality takes credit for everything, really. It just says, this is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. So the kind of thing is, I have the talent, sure, but it's because I have so much depth. It's because I'm spending so much time collecting so many solutions. And I'm collecting so many patterns, and this is the logical process of improving the patterns, throwing away the ones that don't work, making predictions. It's like the stock market. If you're a 4816, you can be learning very creative things in the stock market. This is creative logic. You can be the first one to create your own stock market system because you've collected so many solutions over the time. But you have to be able to execute on them too. And that's the 16. The 16 is the voice of I experiment or not. And people always think that's a funny one because how often do you say I experiment? How often do you really say, I'm going to experiment on this? Nobody really uses the word, but you do say, there's a lot of other things that we say. Look in a little thesaurus, and we say the experiment is test, investigate, trial, inquire, demonstrate, examine, observe, assess, evaluate, appraise, inspect, analyze, scrutinize, and study. So those are the other things that this voice does. It says, I study. All of those are so important. And with the 4816, with the 48 being conscious, it's just going to seem to this person that the 48 is what it's all about. So if you ask them, what is it so important to be talent, you'll just say, well, depth is what's important. You really have to have the solutions. It only happens after a really long amount of time. You have to build them up over a really long period of time. It's all very, very creative, though, when it's kind of working together. And there are 16s and 48s who have that hanging, and then they want so much for the other one, to have the other one. Ra had the 48 but not the 16, you know. So it's interesting when you and you have the 48 not 16. Yeah. And so there's always this feeling. He talked about the inadequacy. I think it's fear of inadequacy, fear of not being good enough. And part of it is if only I could get it out, if I had a way of getting it out. The people that have the 48 have all the depth but no way to get it out. It's kind of like people who have 52 have all the stillness, but if they don't have a 9, there's no focus in that stillness. They're getting cabin fever because they're sitting around squirming because there's nothing to focus on. Well, the same, that 48 is sitting there with like, I have all of it deep inside of me, but how do I get it out?
Yeah.
How? You collaborate with the 16.
Yeah.
Find a hanging 16. That hanging 16 will be like,
I've had one in the
I know how to express it, I know how to get it out there in the world, but their complex is, I'm superficial, I don't have the depth, but I'm good at expressing the depth.
Right.
I'm good at giving points to and putting it out there to the world. So, I mean, it's a projected channel. It tells you something. Just already looking at the human design chart, the difference between the spleen versus the solar plexus, and the fact that it's projected, and the fact that the spleen and the projectors are starved for energy. And that's what recognition is about. The whole thing about waiting for recognition is making sure you have enough people in your life to give you the energy to get the things done you need to get done, so you're not stuck trying to get it done yourself with the non-existent energy, and then wondering why it didn't get done years later, and so on.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I'm going to start talking about it, and then we're going to look at a couple charts. I just want to make sure, I have the chat here open. So, we have Jenny V with us, we have Amber with us, and we have M. Steenbeck, Mikey Steenbeck-Litvin with us as well, and we may be joined a little bit later, we'll see, but in any case, I'm just going to make sure that we have our charts pulled up. I'm going to pull up my own chart here now. And I'll just be talking about them. We don't really need the visuals of the charts. Yeah, pull them. Unless people want to share it. Do you think that's a good idea? I mean, yeah? Okay. Okay. If it's by popular demand, I know. I do know how to share screens in OBS now. I've learned how to do that, but this is fine. Really, we're just talking about the design side anyway, so we can talk about certain placements. So here's kind of my starting discussion of this, is that the mind wants to be everything, the personality wants to be everything. We use the term mind and personality somewhat interchangeably in human design. So Ra always talks about the mind running the life, and he always talks about, you know, the kind of personality thinking it's in charge of everything, and we use them pretty interchangeably. But if there is a distinction, the mind is simply what is accumulated. It is the ornamentation on the personality even, or on the, you know, it is in some sense everything that's built up, everything, if you get into psychoanalysis, you know, stuff, it's like everything that's been introjected, everything you've kind of accumulated about yourself. Right? So it's going to be, the mind is really, if you get like base 2 is what the mind is all about. I'm a mind person at my core. I'm a base 2 person. Every life I come back and I ornament and I decorate and I just do all of the base 2 things. And I'm the one who says, oh, this place looks like a nice place to live. Let's build here. You know, that's the kind of mind thing to do. It builds and makes and all this stuff. And the personality is another aspect of this whole thing. You get into this when you get into base theory. That's base 5, of course. And it has more of it's the ultimate illusion of presence, and the ultimate illusion of harmony, and the ultimate illusion of, it basically doesn't want anything unharmonious in its sight. So this is kind of what Jung talks about, or Freud talks about, with their discovery of fundamental repression, what Lacan would call staying at the imaginary level, which is the level that the space of base 5 kind of stays at, of the personality. People are living at an imaginary level. Now this has practical purposes. If you watch the fascinating and incredible Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who's a great, you know, Lacanian and great explainer of psychoanalysis, he explains that we have to operate at the imaginary. This is in his Reality of the Virtual, where he argues, you know, it's great that we're operating in the imaginary, that's fine. We can't admit into our consciousness, you don't want to look at somebody and think of them sweating and defecating and all the different things they do. You look at them and you see the image or a kind of imaginary version of them that is put forth. In fact, it's the second lines and the fifth lines out here that are the ones that are really getting everybody to project their images out, really, if you kind of think about it. And an image, I mean in the James Dean sense, in the sense of what, you know, it's the second line. You sometimes hard to tell if someone's a second line or a fifth line. The only way you can usually tell is the second line you end up saying, you should do this, right? Whereas the fifth line, you end up kind of being curious what they're calling out to or hearing their call. It's a little bit of a backwards. But they're both projection fields, and they're both what we put out there in the world. Now, my only reason of saying all this is that when you get into human design, one of the hardest things to kind of accept is to look at the chart and realize that you are very, very little of that chart. The you that you really know is just kind of the personality sun. Like when I talk about variable, I basically start by saying, if your variable is left variable and you have any other right variable placements, you primarily experience those as what your mind judges as dysfunctions. Because your mind is so biased already, it's just going to say that the left variable is the right rate of B. Like what I'm trying to say is like, we are so identified with the mind as our personality. But the personality can kind of move around. That's what's cool is the personality is really here like space to get into everything, to experience everything, to kind of move into all of the different modes. So that's what human design does. It kind of loosens you up. It loosens the grip of mind. It says, oh yeah, you have memory. Mind is the voice of I remember. And you start to remember your life, your name, your job, your everything you are. But that's kind of like a plate or a tray that you can also, through various experiences, turn sideways and it all falls on the ground. And then you don't have any, you're in the state of no mind and so on. And of course, the Eastern yogis and everybody thinks that's the final story and that's the end of it. It's kind of like the seven-centered goal, to be enlightened, to get to the end. It's very sixth line actually. The old-fashioned version of the sixth line would just get to the roof and stay there. Never come down. And that was very much what you go up on the mountain to be enlightened and you just never come out. That's what the six lines to this day still want, but it's not. They have to be pulled kicking and screaming down off the roof. But in any case, the personality is sort of transfixed by the mind when you come into human design and is saying, this is who I am, and this is all the things about me, and this is what I remember. And I remember a really cool story about a shamanic experience our friend had, where basically he had gone in and he was on this, psychedelic, and the shaman kept coming over, and the shaman would just, I'll do it here, he would just look at him right in the eyes and turn his hand, like, let me do you. He would do this, he would block the eyes, and then he would turn it sideways. And he just kept doing this. He would block the eyes, and he would turn it. He would just do it once. But, every time he would do this to him, he would come back, and then he would do it every few minutes or every hour or something, because my friend would have started building up things again. It would have turned horizontal again. And so the turning horizontal was basically what allowed things to accumulate. But the turning sideways made it completely ungraspable. And he would think to himself, but then he would try to reach it, and it would be like a smooth thing. He couldn't get a hook. It's like truth was vertical in some sense. That's kind of the state of no mind. Now, it's a beautiful state. You can see because it's a state where you have no memory, you have no name, you have but it's still not the only thing that our life experience is about. It's not the only thing human design's about by a long shot. I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It is the capability of transcending, basically turning off the mind or disconnecting from the mind, ultimately, which is memory, which is the accumulation of memory. But you can't live like that. You have to remember that red means stop and green means go. You have to remember, to pay your taxes, whatever, unless you're a second line. My theory is they don't vote and they don't pay taxes. No, I'm joking. But in any case, but the personality is in for this big shock because it looks at the chart and it basically goes, okay, cool, this is my configuration within this thing. And it's true, it is. But it basically says, okay, so all this is me, this is me, this is me, this is me. Well, that's cool, but it kind of already just wants to be everything. So if you start to tell people things and they're not expecting or not preparing it, they'll get into a mode of, that's me, that's not me. And Lacan actually has a name for this. He calls it recognition. He says that recognition is when a client would come to him and they begin to recognize themselves. However, he always spelled recognition as misrecognition also, with the parentheses, miss. I mean, he did it in French, méconnaissance, and he always put the mais and parentheses. But this misrecognition, which is the same thing as recognition, is useful because what it does is it kind of gives the mind something to watch, something to look for. It gives it something tangible to hold on to. But it's also very limiting. And the thing is, it'll change over time. And the way it changes is through repressed contents entering into consciousness. And this is where the design side comes in. Because the design side is the first ever map. This is why we're going into the red. This is the map of what's actually there that has to be continually admitted into consciousness. Sort of your odd bedfellow. Like, Like the Thomas Wolfe quote, I show up to work every day, but that other guy, he's a lout. He doesn't show up sometimes, or he's late, or he's not at all. As a writer, you kind of need your creative spirit to be there, and it doesn't always show up. That's the design side. Well, my point here is, if you look at Lacan's model, it's actually a very nine-centered in a lot of ways. I mean, Jung, Lacan, these people really were evolving a Plutonic inner truth system. It really hit its heyday and stride. I mean, Jung gave birth to the Red Book, which he completed when Pluto was discovered, and he spent the 15 years leading up to the discovery of Pluto. It's an incredible thing to see that Jung was standing right there, sort of channeling the cosmic. He was a 2-4. He was, and then we see, Lacan and this whole explication of how it works. And then we see human design, which comes along and actually gives us a map. Jung said, we can never describe the unconscious, we can only circumscribe it. Meaning you can only go around it, as if like a boat going around an island or something. You can't really go into it because it's such a mystery. It'll always be a mystery. Well, now we actually have something like a map of the tunnels. It's a really interesting... It is this forbidden continent, this unknown place, but it is also something we kind of come to know progressively. So in Freud's model, repression... If anyone needs any water, by the way, anything, feel free to come and go. But I'll finish up on this, and then we're going to start looking at our design placements.
I like that visual, by the way.
Yeah. So in Freud's model, and he was I think the first one who called it the dark continent. But
you're getting comments also, by the way.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, we have Anastasia. I have 11 second lines, and I hate voting and taxes. For fans of Succession, Connor Roy, second line, he's like, no taxes, that's his whole platform. Brother Man, The Biogenetic Inheritance, and Neil deGrasse Tyson et al. Has the nerve to say Pluto isn't a planet. Yeah. He comes here quite a bit. He comes to Santa Fe because it's some of the best star viewing in the country. Really.
I also really likes wine.
Oh, yeah. Well, special places. So for Freud's model, basically what is repressed is kind of what can't be admitted into our image we have of ourselves, and it returns. There's the return of the repressed, which causes neurosis. And neurosis, to have a neurotic structure is not unhealthy, is not a bad thing in psychoanalysis, because that actually means everything's functioning properly, that when you're lying to yourself or ignoring, you start to get anxiety attacks. Is the fundamental thing behind all phobias. In fact, anxiety comes before phobia. Phobia is a localized fixation of what is a generalized anxiety. It's actually a relief. It's the savior from anxiety to get a phobia. But either way, whether it's an anxiety or a phobia, there's a great quip from Lacan, anxiety is the only emotion which doesn't lie. And he really advises people not to trust any emotion except anxiety. That tells you you're lying to yourself. That tells you betrayed yourself. That tells you, and it is very proto-human design, because it is about what is really discovering what you want. And people criticize it because they say, well, how can people be in Lacan be going to him for 20 years or going to different, like Lacanians? And the great student of Jacques Lacan, Jacques Sibony, who knew him personally, said, do you criticize your tennis instructor and ask them how long you might play tennis for? And this gets back even to our kind of 4816. There's a 4816 element to, learning the techniques and the patterns. There's also many other elements to the experience of being in, psychoanalysis and the individual reflections and so on. There's many other components to it. But my point is that for Freud, there's a fundamental concept of repression which developed by Lacan into what he calls the Bar of Repression, which he explains as essentially a conveyor belt. And when it moves too slow, this conveyor belt basically stops delivering new unconscious contents, and people lose touch with the sort of vivifying effect of the unconscious. When it moves too fast, they get into a hypermanic state. For people watching Succession, season 3, no spoilers, but you can see what happens when sometimes the conveyor belt moves too quickly, and then the person has almost a rush of intensity because of it. And this is always the danger of kind of regulating the flow of the revolving door or conveyor belt, two images that Lacan uses to describe this bar of repression, beyond which we have no insight into. And so you get to learn things about yourself, but you don't want to learn too many things too fast. You don't want to go too far too fast. Someone comes to therapy and they say, I'm so lucky, I have a perfect family. I bet everybody else who comes in here has really screwed up families. Well, after some period of time, they finally learn that they don't have a perfect family. But what Lacan said here is really profound. This is why he liked the variable length session, where he would punctuate the session and end it right when they would have a realization before they could explain the new thing. Because he said that basically what people are always doing is trying to stabilize back to the imaginary, where they take the new signifiers and use them as new swords and shields. So instead of saying I have a perfect family and they're fighting against having dysfunctional, suddenly they're like, well, my family's dysfunctional. You have no idea what it's like to come from a dysfunctional family. And they begin to use that as its new weapon. In fact, one of the more controversial examples he uses is when women give birth to children, they will often use the child as the example of something nobody else could ever possibly understand, what it is to raise a child, which is then wielded as the sort of way of maintaining a sort of power over their entire psychological space. And of course men do it too in their own ways with their own kind of, for like Lacan, for the male guys, buys a big truck and that's a kind of, phallic symbol or his power objects or things like that. So it's basically these compensations that are all about trying to be everything, trying to fill all space. Looking at the chart, the mind and the personality really wants to be all 9 centers, all 64, gates, all 36 channels. It wants to be and do everything. But then it doesn't want to be limited. As soon as you start to tell somebody their narcissism is offended, their self-regard is offended, and they don't want, and I speak even personally too, because this is how it works, right? Like we just have this sort of natural ability to fill all space. Nature abhors a vacuum. And I think what's beautiful about it is it all starts to come back after the deconditioning, and I'll maybe talk about that after we get to more of the design side, where you actually do get to like surf all of the waves of, you do get to experience all 64 gates. You're just no longer trying to be the representative of that gate. You no longer feel like it's your duty to represent that on this planet. And you're no longer going around saying, I don't have 4816, but as not self, I would be downright offended if you say, you don't have the talent. What? Everyone wants to have talent. I don't have 3536 sexual talent. I'd be downright offended if someone says, you're lousy in bed or whatever. These are like, we all want to be, how do they sell all of these magazines, 10 tricks for your, lover in bed, where those are sold to the people who don't have 3536. The ones who have it don't care. They know. The ones who don't have it are the ones who are constantly wanting to spice it up. So it's just, at each step of the way, it's like this narcissism of wanting to be everything, and then trying to kind of pick and choose in reaction to it, where people, this is why I don't like doing personal readings. I love to record my readings and send them in, is because I don't want the person to get into, yes, that's me, yep, no, that's not me, yep, that's me, no, I don't see myself in that. Well, this one really makes sense, no, that's not me. I don't give a sorry, like, I'm just telling you the mechanics here, you can believe it or not. So, but in any case, and what's funny about it too is I feel like I have my own little theory that we really get sick in the channels, which is something I've heard Ross say, but that the mental side of it is more in the openness. That our mental illnesses, our anxieties, our tics, the places we betray ourselves, all this stuff. Like I have undefined solar plexus. I could betray myself by feeling guilt-tripped and ashamed and not wanting to hurt somebody's feelings and tiptoeing around and then doing something I don't want to do. I have undefined ego. I could feel I have to prove my loyalty. I have to prove I'm a good friend. I have to prove blah, 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 blah. So that's where all the mental stuff comes in. And then the anxiety comes in. Oh my God, the anxiety is telling me that I betrayed myself. There's a really beautiful story from, I guess it's not from Lacan's practice, but it's from a Lacanian. And a husband and wife just have a young daughter. And they're laying in bed. You've probably heard this one, right? And the daughter's crying. And the dad wakes up. And the dad remembers, the first thing he remembers, this is what they say in their couples counseling next week. The first thing he thinks is, it's her turn to take care of the daughter. That's true. They take turns. Well, what he does is, he keeps hearing her awake, tries to wake up his wife, she won't wake up. Tries to wake her up again, won't wake up. Tries to wake up again. Finally wakes her up. She goes, takes care of the daughter, comes back to bed. First of all, everything's all wrong. They're sleeping in the same bed. That's the first problem. But then I'm just going to leave that out of here. But okay, so anyway, then they have a huge fight the next morning. And they have no idea how this huge fight happened. And he was like so angry and all this stuff. And they go back to therapy. Can you solve this mystery? Any guesses? Well, first of all, it's very textbook human design, kind of like initiating, like, hey, it's your turn, it's your turn, it's your turn, poking. But the real thing that they came to, and this is why I do think that Lacan is very proto-human design, using the vocabulary of the evolving Pluto understanding of inner truth and so on of the 1930s, 40s, 50s. This is what the conclusion was that actually he had betrayed himself. Because what Lacan says is guilt always stems from a betrayed unconscious desire. If you don't follow your true unconscious inner desire, you start to feel guilty. And then you attribute the guilt to anything. You attribute the guilt to whatever. You just make up a story about it. But the guilt is generated as a chemical reaction at the moment you go against your true desire. What father would not want to take care of his daughter crying? It's built into our damn DNA. He just was so in his head, he goes, it's her turn. And he goes, I want to do this. And, I don't want to do it. It's her turn. It's not fair. Blah, blah, blah. I made up a million stories. He really wanted to actually just wake up and let his wife sleep and go take care of the daughter. And it was only when he was able to understand the repressed desire that he had to actually not keep track of this fairness thing and actually, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't really care about it, but his mind did. His mind did. So I do think psychoanalysis is a really powerful proto sort of version of human design that just doesn't give you the design side. Now, for the second part of this, I'm going to open it up. We're going to have more just talking, and basically what we're going to do is we're just going to look at first the channels, and here's kind of the context for it. I started to say that the physical illness happens in the channels, the mental illness happens in the openness, by which I mean that's where we get the anxiety, that's where we get the guilt, that's where we get the panic attacks. That's where we get all of that stuff is in the openness. That's what leads us to betray ourselves and to have all of these problems that are from that. That's what pulls us away from ourselves. On the other hand, it's the definition that actually has illness of the form of the body. It's the defined heart that is actually at the highest risk of having heart issues. Based around, and not to say that the undefined ego won't. They absolutely aren't designed to take the stress that they put themselves on. And there very much are psychosomatic things that cause chemical cocktails that are very damaging and so on. I'm not trying to say that. But it's the defined ego with the actual life force energy that obligates each of us, gives each of us a responsibility to fulfill it. You have to do that thing that you have in your life force energy. And the fact of the matter is, we typically figure it out for the ones that are personality, and we typically don't notice the design ones, and we don't maybe realize the design ones. And when we're going at not living our design, we're ignoring the design ones. So the design side of it, it might still be happening. It's also funny. It's like when you tell people about the not self, you can almost do an inverse reading and tell them the not self. They see themselves in it. But if you tell them the limitations of their actual design placements, they're often very annoyed by that and go, like if you were to describe my aura, my format aura, as a very dry, extreme, because I have 952 on the design side, completely design, no conscious, just very dry and making everybody like very like a kind of like a library, making everybody focus, pay attention, sit still, all the stuff. Well, my personality, thank God, is also contributing to the whole thing, is making it wet, and is actually making it more engaging and exciting, and it's not just like Bueller, with the kind of, that would be the fully dry. I've met people who have fully, we were talking earlier about those 4816 projectors, if they're single definition and they're 4816 only, they only have the, if they only have that, then it's really, it's very, but it's all about being dry. Now again, it doesn't mean that they can't experience the wet and have that, through transits and those juicy 35, 36s and everything, but Freud was mentally grounded in the gate of self-expression and came up with the concept of free association. Yeah, well, it's actually, free association, yeah, exactly, that was Freud, and then a very similar one was Jung, where he did the word association experiment, which is not just free association. Freud's rule, his only rule was keep talking and you can say anything you want. Keep talking or just speaking is what is allowed. It's like you can just speak freely, basically. But Jung was actually the one who came up with the word association experiment, where you say house and then somebody says father, and you say penguin and they say mother, and you say whatever, and you keep going all these around, or you say mother and they tell you the first association of mother. You say father, they give you some first association. You say, and what Jung was looking for, he was only like 21, 22, 23 years old. This is what got his attention from Freud, and what made Freud such a fan of Jung, before their, falling out, was actually this very word association experiment. And what Jung was looking for, and what Freud was fascinated by, is that Jung was looking for what would make them hesitate. He didn't care what word you said. He wasn't writing down what word you said. He's just saying a word, saying a word, saying a word, saying a word. Oh, you flinched. What's going on there? So you're like, but that's what he was looking for. He was looking for the hot spot of the word. And he gives the hot word, and that hot word tells him the heat map of what's going on in the unconscious. What unconscious need isn't being met, what unconscious desire isn't being met. Now let's imagine somebody who has a fully unconscious 35, 36. They have an unconscious desire for impersonal new experience, which is often sexual in nature. Now let's say they have a conscious tribal channel. A tribal channel like the 1949, which is all about let's settle down and hold hands well into old age. And let's say they're split. Even better would be split. Something on the caring side. Fully conscious 50-27, say. You know what I mean? And it's going to be, then they're going to have these two conflicting needs, and the conscious one is going to say, I need to have this tribal, caring, committed, monogamous bond, and that 35, 36 is like party town. Let's go to Belize. It's but they're not going to necessarily realize it because on the design side. Okay, so let's look at, does anyone have any comments first, or should we? Oh yeah, Warren Roller, Freud described that the importance of free association is that the patients spoke for themselves. Yes, it's so much, Freud was fighting against suggestion. At the time, hypnotherapy and suggestion and animal magnetism and people who probably had, gate 26 and a defined ego and stuff were kind of silver-tongued, magicians of all you need is the magnetism and the confidence and so on. And it was very much based on suggestion, like hypnotherapy, like almost, or like an exorcism or something. Like, you don't need to be afraid anymore. You don't need to be afraid of spiders. You can get over it. Or like, I am not afraid of spiders. Like that was what it was all about, suggestion, And so psychoanalysis said, no, let's get the person talking. Let's see where they go.
Yeah.
Freud was split, unconscious single definition and conscious single definition. Oh, but then coming together. Wow, very cool. I would love to look at his chart. Maybe we can look at that in a future one as well. Okay, so I have Amber's chart here, 37-40. The 37 is conscious, the 40 is unconscious. So, first of all, what is the kind of requirement, or in this case we can even use the word need, the tribal keynote of the 37-40?
Support.
Yes, support and being a part of a whole is a specific need. It's a part seeking a whole, part of something bigger than itself. And it wants to just be part of this group, and it wants to really make the bargain and make the bond. And part of those bargains and bonds, this is in intimate relationships and business relationships and friend relationships. There's going to be bargains that are going to happen. And the 40 is a love gate. So that's a real love of work, but it's also the gate of denial, the gate of saying no. And that 37 is the gate of affection. Funny that the one that's affectionate is not actually the loving one. The loving one is the one that's going to work really, really hard for the affectionate one. And that's how it's going to prove its love. Because it's in the ego, it's about proving. And it proves it through its capacity. It's not even how long it can work. That's stamina. That's, 21. And it's not how much brash nerve it has, and it's not how much courage it has. It's literally just about the capacity. Now, this gate 40 in its capacity is unconscious for you. It's on the design side. So you might not realize that the capacity side has to be there of the bargain too. The denial side, the alone time has to be there too. For you, you might just see it as the affection and the camaraderie among friends, the kind of 37, which is the emotional side of it. Mm-hmm. That's the one that says, hey, we're friends because we have affection for each other, we have family together, we have community together. It has this very juicy kind of, we cook for each other, and we do all of these kind of, it's almost like what you would give in exchange for the love. In exchange for the love of the 40. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting. So that being conscious is kind of saying, because the bargain, basically, the fairness, the two sides of the bargain say, I will work for you, but I need alone time. This is why we got the 9 to 5 day, which, by the way, is completely broken down because we're at the end of the cross of planning. That's a cross of planning thing. 9 to 5 day evolved during the cross of planning and has now gone away. People work crazy hours now. Nobody works 9 to 5. I mean, we still have the semblance of it. I guess some people are still in that kind of, but it's completely breaking down. But since COVID, I mean, like everybody working from home, catching up on things, doing this. I mean, it's very flexible. I mean, I guess we all technically work 9 to 5. We all have office hours 9 to 5, but it's so remote anyway that I've done 2 a.m.
breaking down.
Right, I've done 2 a.m. talks with people in Russia, and and I mean, it's all over the place. 2 a.m. my time, 9 a.m. So it's this really.
And 4 days aloneness.
So 40 is the gate of aloneness because that's part of the bargain is I will do this for you, but you need to leave me alone. And that's the 9 to 5 is I will work, but I need to have my alone time. And that's even part of what we've gotten during this cross of planning is we've gotten to have our alone time, and it's the fair amount of alone time. What fair amount of alone time do I earn not having to work for other people, not having to help other people? And what bargain is it made? And, you can see couples who have this, or who, one of them has it, by the way. If anyone's in a couple, you can tell, partners and so on, that, or business partners, friends, everyone, that, you are going to set the bargain. And if both of you have it, then if you're both pretty reasonable people, then you'll set a fair bargain, together. But it's interesting because you have a completely unconsciously defined ego. So you can be fully aware of your emotional state of how you feel about it, but unaware of how reasonable or unreasonable you're being. And actually one of the great gifts of the undefined ego, when they decondition, is to help the defined ego to be, to really help them be reasonable and see what's reasonable and what isn't. And to help them reflect on, okay, it's reasonable to not do this, but it's unreasonable if I don't do it for that. And it's reasonable to do this, and it's pretty reasonable to, in this situation, it's almost like the defined ego is like, this sounds reasonable, right? And the defined's like, it's pretty reasonable. It's kind of like, so you can like pass it by us. But with you having the fully unconscious, all that means, it's okay. It's just like, it's not anything bad. It's like, just like Ra, he had a fully unconscious head with his 61 was, unconsciously activated. He did not have a defined head like you, but it was at least activated. And you have an unconscious 61 activation as well. When you have these unconscious activations, you just kind of have to trust. You don't really know what's going on there. It just bubbles up out of there. It's like you have like a department of like gnomes who are like building something, and then they're like, here it is. And so in your case, they're building the bargain. And so ultimately, they're building what's reasonable for you. And the fact of the matter is, people who don't have that whole channel, though, are going to have a really hard time sometimes. Usually, if they don't have the whole channel, they just submit. Like, I don't have the whole channel, so it's dominance, so I just submit. I go, sounds fair to me. But, if I had half of the channel, that's a compromise. Like I do partnership readings, and if somebody has 37-40 and the other just has 37 or 40, the one with 37 or 40 is going to say it's not fair. And I'm going to say, well, it's fair according to them, and they're the one that has it, and you can take it or leave it. Because the one who has it has the consistent energy to know it's fair. But with you, it's unconscious. You can basically just be like, look, I don't know why it feels fair to me, but for some reason, I just feel like I got to give you this $100 bill back. Like, you gave me too much. It wasn't, you can do that, and you just don't know why. Or you can be like, no, come on. Like, what are you doing? This is, you can basically, it's no longer fair. Well, and it's all going to be, that's kind of my point is like, how healthy your heart is going to be directly related to how healthy you're living that design as a projected channel, being invited in to be a part of something bigger than you, all this stuff, having the emotional clarity about what wholes you should be a part of, where you should be giving your support. If you're supporting them, they have to be supporting you too, the needs being met both ways. I mean, all this stuff. So that's kind of, and then with your 61-24, the 61 unconscious, the 24 conscious, it's going to be, again, like, you're going to have this very mystical mind that is basically kind of doing it on its own. It's an interesting idea to think of what is automatic versus what requires our attention. And it's funny because in some sense they're actually opposite. Like I get into personality type a lot and we talk about how our dominant function, what we're really good at, is so automatic you don't have to think about it, it's autopilot. And it's actually really hard and requires a lot of conscious effort to do the stuff we're not good at. But from another perspective, you could just think that the stuff that's in the personality actually requires some involvement or some engagement. Like I have a 2946 fully personality. And so that's going to come out in my personality. It's going to come out in sort of the persona that I embody, right? And it's going to come out in the aura. It causes definition. Unlike some of the controversial offshoots, John Martin and so on, and Teresa Blanding, who say that their definition, their version of personality definition is that it doesn't necessarily yield the same benefits of strategy and authority. I think it does. I just think it requires a lot of personality engagement. It requires personality engagement, and it's sort of in plain sight. Like, I can see exactly when I commit my energy to something. And that 29, something comes to me, and they want me to do it, and I just go, I just don't want to do it. I can see immediately when it's that experiential thing. But I don't necessarily notice when I'm sitting there drinking my coffee, and then suddenly 3 hours have passed because my unconscious 952 is so focused and so absorbed and kind of doing its thing. It's like on autopilot. I can just let it be on autopilot. I can kind of turn my mind off and let it work. So I do kind of think of the personality side as conscious engagement. For you, that 24 means you're going to be painfully aware sometimes of the recurring thoughts. Anyone with 2461, like Mike, will know you can get things stuck in your head, you can get songs stuck in your head. I experience it because I have neither of those. And so when I'm around 6124s, I'll get that stuck in the head recurring thing. And, it totally happens to me, or when there's transits. And it's basically, in the case of, with the 61 being unconscious, it's going to realize that whole process of actually having, it's basically, what is the 6124 really doing? It's waiting for something to change. It's waiting for some mystical revelation. It's waiting for something to happen, really. And the way Ross says it is they're checking so often if anything's happened, they miss it. Because what they're checking, if it happened, they don't notice something else happened. That's 6124, and it's waiting to be recognized, but what is it really waiting to be recognized for? I mean, it's a very interesting, very peculiar, very weird channel, right? We have mysticism here. I mean, you have it. I don't know if you have any answers here. This is not exactly rhetorical, but, Ra kind of says the same kind of things. He loves talking about how weird the head ones are, how the 64 is experiential, but it seems so logical, and it also seems really individual, and how, like, the individual one seems really experiential, but it also seems logical because it's repetitive. Like, he talks about how when you get to the head, it's like all bets are off. Like, this is like we don't have to we don't be like, it's a weird place that we're in. Well, that's 61. I mean, these are asking the kind of question of what's on the other side of the edge of the universe, asking impossible questions. What happened before the beginning of time? That's a 6124 question. Who will seriously think about it? What was before? There was a 1 hour, speaking of Neil deGrasse Tyson, we were talking about earlier, he hosted a 1 hour plus talk about what happened before the beginning of time, which, as a logic person, there's no before, because time instantiates beforeness and requires, and it's a prerequisite, and because logic is based on order and based on order of operations, you must instantiate the concept of time before you are able to have a before. And so I like to quote Hegel and say the fall from Eden created Eden. There was no Eden before the fall. The fall from grace constitutes what was fallen from as an imaginary fictive before that never really existed.
We were talking about that the other day with people looking back at the golden years.
Yeah, golden years of my life. It was never golden. It was always rough, but you just kind of idealize it. Like we were talking about even earlier today about how the personality wants to idealize and kind of glamorize, and that's a big nice thing about human design is it really gets you back into the right alignment of what's correct for you and puts the mind kind of in its right place of watching and seeing what's happening. And so what does it look like for the mind to watch the unconscious thing? It looks like this thing appeared out of the blue. It looks like, I don't know why, but with that 61 unconscious, it's almost like not knowing what you're going to say. You have undefined throat, so that's part of it, but you also have fully unconscious throat, so even when it is activated, not knowing what you're going to say. I think it's only really defined in personality activation, and or where they can actually have some sort of consistency there, because there is a consistency. But it's really interesting when it's completely, unconscious as well. There's fully unconscious channels. Not in your chart, but like in mine, those fully unconscious channels.
Me too.
So which one is it for you?
2644.
So the 2644, that's going to basically be fully unconscious. Oh no, it's not though. It's not fully though. It's fully unconscious and plus half conscious. Okay. So which kind of sheds some light on it. So the 26 is conscious. You're going to understand how important selling yourself is for entrepreneurship. You might underestimate how important it is to have the HR department, to be a 44 and to know about what people in your life, also being a 2-4, that's not kind of naturally what. The fourth line is unconscious. So it's about, basically your network and drawing from that network, and those can kind of work together. The other thing I would just say is just looking at the profile, since we are talking about personality and design, just as a side note. Obviously, the first number in your profile is your personality. You have 6th line, a 2nd line, a 2nd line, and a 5th line. The second number is your design. We have a 2nd line, a 4th line, a 4th line, and a 1st line. Very different to look at the two. And it's, I used to, years ago, describe it as the dominant, basically that the personality line of your profile is kind of what your imagined life purpose is, because that's really as far as the personality can see, is the personality sun earth, really the line it's on. It tries to be an embodiment of that particular Godhead. It tries to be an embodiment of that particular energy. The personality is like, its version of its life purpose is so limited. Ra was a 51.5, his personality sun 51.5. That was what his view of his life purpose was, and then maybe Neptune is the sort of not self life purpose we tack on. But you can see like all your design placements, all that stuff, we don't really realize that also, like you said, can bring, like earlier you were saying, it can bring meaning into life. Like all of these can bring meaning, all of these can bring purpose. Ultimately, they're all prerequisites that we have to fulfill, or they will generate the wrong neurochemistry. They're going to generate bitterness, or they're going to generate frustration. And if they're unconscious, it just means you can be totally effing oblivious to the fact that you're deeply frustrated. There's a great quote from Jung. He said he was continually surprised by people who came to him that they would have a veritable war going on between their unconscious and their ego, but they would have no consciousness of that war. Because the ego is not something we're fully conscious of even. We're not even fully aware. It's like, it's basically our center of agency that says, this is me and this is who I am. But that sort of idea we have of ourselves, because we're not allowing ourselves to see certain things, because they would be too unpalatable to us, they would be too distasteful, they would be too horrifying. A great Freud quote, he said, we are capable of far greater and far worse things than we imagine ourselves. Right? We don't think that we can do these things. And so, that's what it really gets down to, is if you have design placements, like you're fully unconscious 4426, you also have the addition of the conscious 26. That gives you some awareness of that need to basically have that nerve to go out there and sell yourself and be the creative, to do the creative work that then makes a residual income and so on. But someone who has the conscious 4426 will very much realize how engaged they are and how important it is for them to have their financial needs met. When it's unconscious, you get to realize that. You get to realize whether it's like there's Ginny and there's Ginny 2, or that's what, for Jung, he said that he called it personality number 2. That's what he called it, personality number 2. And personality number 2, this is from a very young age, he would go and he actually embodied in a little man that was, a carved wooden figure that he kept in a box, and he would go look at and talk to. A really interesting kid, This is young Jung. And in any case, he had the personality number 2. We all have personality number 2. My personality number 1 is 2946. It's wet. It's personality sun in 46. It's saying, it's my desire, motivation. It's saying, all of these things are colored by it. You can do it. Let's all not compete, or let's not, I always say not compete, but it's not threaten violence to each other and kind of get along in my own version of the Jesus myth, because 46 associates with that. That's my personality. But I also have personality number 2. I have this design side, which it's very, very important to not be rushed. It's very, very important to have all this time to sit still under the tree while people are saying, you're lazy, you're not working, you're not doing anything. But it's tremendously difficult to not work when other people are working. It's tremendously difficult to sit still and try to accumulate and predict and notice and predict, no, that didn't work out, and scratch the prediction off. And you're doing a lot of stuff while you're concentrating. You're, figuring it out, and you're putting all the things together, and you're putting them into categories, and you're grouping them, and you're, all this is happening. And that's a requirement that my personality number 2 has. My personality number 1 might be kicking and screaming about that. For Jenny, your personality number 2 is the 4426. Personality number 1 is the 1858 and the 4253. So with that, it's like knowing you want to share, knowing the collective side of it, knowing, wanting to be a part of these collective things. But maybe because of the less conscious tribal side, just underplaying or not realizing that there's a personality number 2 that really has to have its needs met, and the fundamental need, 44 is a love gate. It's the love of money. It's the love of success. It's the love of doing well, and that's very important. I have a hanging 26, Mike has a hanging 44, we both know this as well. All right, well, let's see. I think we can kind of wrap up with some questions, and I think this was a really productive one. Yeah, thank you all for tuning in. Let's see questions and comments. All righty. Let's see what we got. Mets 3-5 splenic projector. Yes, you are, and you have that 4816, and we've been. It's. Let's see, Joyful Projector. Thanks for tuning in. Leslie Winter. Hello from Seattle. Board Roller Raw was awesome. Hey, Leslie. Joyful Projector, hanging 37.4, and I grew up saying, that's not fair! Yeah, that's definitely... Board Roller, 2 Joyful Projector. A friend of mine has an unconscious hanging 37.4, always saying, that she's not really a friendly person. I'm not really nice. That's a funny one. 61 is pressure, too. That's a good point. Yeah, it's the pressure to return to something over and over and over again. Joyful Projector. My hanging 37 is in an undefined solar plexus. I did a lot of emotional work for my family. Was quite bitter about it because I didn't get a return on investment. Yeah, 4th line needs the ROI. Well, thank you all. Really excited, really great time. And
Yeah.
Jenny, Amber, Mike, thanks everybody. And until next time. Thanks for watching.
And Jinx.
Alright.
Go see Mike. You want to go see Mike? Go
You
see
didn't end
Mike.
it
Go
yet.
see Mike.
Okay, I know.
No.